Welcome to Bipolar She. I'm your host, Janine Noel. Before we get started, the content of this show does include suicide and suicidal ideation. If you are ever in need of immediate support, please dial 988, a suicide and crisis lifeline. I believe in the healing power of writing and speaking our mental health stories in all their raw details. So let's go. Since 1985, Kathleen Adams has been a top innovator in the field of therapeutic writing. She is a psychotherapist, registered poetry journal therapist, and a master mentor and supervisor who got her start bringing her journal techniques into inpatient and intensive outpatient psychiatric programs. By 1988, she had founded the Center for Journal Therapy, and in 2008, Kay founded the Therapeutic Writing Institute, a comprehensive training institute for facilitators of therapeutic writing. Kay's mission is to share the power of writing with all who desire self-directed change. She is the author of 14 books on the power of writing, including the best-selling Journal to the Self, which is also a journaling method taught by facilitators all over the world. All right, welcome, Kay.
Thank you, Janine. It's wonderful to be with you, and I'm so happy to welcome you into the family of certified instructors of Journal to the Self.
Oh,
So
thank
you
you.
are going to be teaching very soon, yes?
Yes, I'm so excited. I wanted to make sure listeners know that we do already have a relationship and that I have been through your training program. I'm so excited. It just came to me at a time where I was feeling really stuck. I had been doing writing, creative writing and teaching it, but it just wasn't lighting me up anymore. And a friend recommended Journal to the Self to me. And I just felt the experience in that first 2-hour class just transformative. And I just fell back in love with writing within 2 hours. So
isn't it wonderful?
yeah,
Thank you. I didn't know that part of your story.
It's such powerful work. And what I'd love to do is at the beginning of these podcasts, just kind of get a sense if there was ever any time in your life where you were struggling with mental health or burnout or something where you did turn to your journal, or perhaps a time when you didn't know about journaling and how that could have helped you.
Thank you for the question. That's such a good question. And the answer is absolutely. I have turned to my journal in times of emotional distress and mental health crises. The story that first comes to mind is way back in a different century when I was married to a very charismatic man who swept me off my feet, and we fell in love and got engaged and got married very quickly within 6 months of meeting. And things changed almost immediately. Actually, they were changing before we were married, but I was in denial about it. It turned out he was very emotionally abusive. And it was just a very, very difficult time. I was in my 20s, my late 20s into my very early 30s. And it was just a really challenging time. I isolated myself from my family and friends because I was so ashamed of how awful he was and how shredded my self-esteem was becoming. And I didn't write. I've been writing a journal since I was 10 years old and loving it. And I stopped writing for the most part because I was scared that he was going to read what I was writing and use it against me. So I had a journal hidden away, but I didn't write in it very often. But when it got to the breaking point, I always turned and just spilled it out. So one day I was at the breaking point and I was spilling it out, and I had this deja vu feeling of this feels so familiar to me. And I turned back in my journal to the last entry before this one. It was about 6 months prior, and it was almost word for word the same right. And I thought, I get it. This is not changing. It doesn't matter what I do or don't do. It's not changing. I can't impact this. So I made this very brave choice right then and there that I was going to start therapy. I had never been in therapy in my life, but I found a therapist who was wonderful immediately able to see through my defenses and my apologies and my rationalization for his behavior and said, "This is not normal. You are not supposed to be treated like this. And we need to figure out how you can change your circumstances." I ended up leaving the marriage, and it was the healthiest decision I could have made. It was that one journal entry that really, well, the two compared, that really woke me up. Since then, in 2019, I was asked by a publisher if I would write a book, journal writing for anxiety. And I had treated dozens, if not hundreds, of people with anxiety in my practice. Well, probably not hundreds, but lots. And it was during my research for that that I realized that I had had an anxiety disorder for most of my life. I thought everybody was like this. But from the therapeutic standpoint, it had been simple for me to stay in my professional role and not internalize too much about what I was doing. But I started in the process of writing this book, I started writing to my own prompts and realized the power of writing for a specific purpose, in this case, anxiety. I had a very personal, up close relationship with my own anxiety disorder and how I could keep myself regulated.
Yeah, it's so interesting, literally noticing that pattern in your journals and that helping you make change in your life, which is so
Yeah,
much what this is about with self-directed development.
it's self-directed change. Yeah.
Self-directed change. Were you able to manage your anxiety through journaling?
Well, I have certainly raised my consciousness about it. And when I start catastrophizing, which is my first signal, I've learned to just kind of like stop, drop, and breathe, first of all, and see if I can bring some rationality to my thinking. It takes me like 5 to 7 minutes to articulate what I'm stressing about, catastrophizing about, and then come up with an alternative, like a better feeling thought. Do the five sensory check in, just write about something that's going well today. I've taught myself a lot of standardized quick fixes that will usually shift my state in 5 minutes of writing and 2 minutes of reflection. So, I'll go reading back through an old journal and see my spikes. And I can kind of see my self regulation through how much space there is between the times that I use this technique, to really just stop, drop, and write. It's probably 90% of the time I can shift my state in short order. So it just takes practice.
So that makes me think about your early work with the women who are on a psychiatric
Yes.
and the psych hospital, and primarily with dissociative disorder.
Dissociative disorders. Yeah. Back in the day, we called it multiple personality disorder. Now it's known as dissociative identity disorder. It is a result of almost always extreme trauma in early childhood. Not always, but that's the most common thing is severe abuse in childhood. And I'd been working at a regular adult unit in a psychiatric hospital as the evening shift group counselor right out of graduate school for a few years. And then Journal to the Self came out during that time. Journal to the Self was published in 1990. And a psychiatrist in town who led this dissociative identity disorder program, apparently the book was quite popular. And so all of the patients had read Journal to the Self and they all loved it and they wanted a journal group started. So the psychiatrist called me and asked me if I would like to join their expressive arts therapies team as a journal therapist, which was like unheard of because I had just made up the term journal therapy to name my business, the Center for Journal Therapy. So I was thrilled to be offered this opportunity. And I did intake interviews with the women. Almost everybody was writing a journal and very attached to their journal and felt that their journal was a lifeline to their sanity. The research psychologist in the field, James Pennebaker, has a methodology of writing about stressful, traumatic experiences that has formed the research base for almost everything we have in the field right now. And basically, one of the things he says that is that when you are writing about traumatic or difficult material, it is normal to feel worse instead of better after you write, but it should resolve itself within a reasonable amount of time after you have a good night's sleep or eat dinner or take a shower or walk the dog. Just something distracting will shift you out of that mood in fairly short order. So I asked these patients, do you ever experience obstacles, blocks, or barriers as you are writing that ends up with you feeling worse instead of better, and it doesn't resolve on its own? And 96% of them said yes. And I was floored by this. And so I started asking how they wrote, and almost without exception, they described a process that we call free writing, which is just sitting down and writing in your journal, without much forethought of maybe you have a topic that you want to explore, but we don't really think about free writing as anything other than just writing in a journal. And my whole methodology is based on a lot of different ways to write in the journal, which I call techniques. And free writing is one of the techniques. But there's also 17 more. So I heard this story over and over about how they would, kind of write themselves off the cliff and re-traumatize themselves as a result of trying to resolve their trauma. So when we got a little bit deeper in this, I realized free writing, by its very definition, has no structure, no pacing, no containment. You start where you start, you end when you end. There's no regulation other than your self-regulation. And they didn't have much experience with reliably being able to self-regulate. And I thought, well, if structure, pacing, and containment is completely absent here, what would be the most structured, paced, and contained thing that I can think of? I took all of my techniques, wrote them all out on 3x5 index cards, spread them out, gave them a relative structure, pacing, containment value, and then rearranged them in order. And it turns out that the most structured, paced, and contained technique that I teach is the sentence stem. Right now I feel, today I want, the most important thing to do, finish the sentence, you're done. It takes, anywhere from a few seconds to a minute, maybe if you're writing a long sentence or more than one. And then I just, anchored everything up as we went up the ladder and said to them, if I could help you find a way to not fall off the cliff, would that be useful? And would you want that? They all said yes. So I taught them this method and they loved it. And they didn't love every technique equally, which is normal, but they loved enough of them so that, and it didn't mean they didn't do free writing anymore, but when they started to feel tippy, they could back themselves down, bring in some structure, and stay on top of their own process. And it did teach them self-regulation and self-management skills because they could become aware of when it was starting to get too much, and they could make their own intervention without going through the very difficult process of re-traumatizing.
I find this so interesting when we think about the bipolar community and how we have these nice lows. They can get quite low. And then we have the mania, which can be a bit uncomfortable, or even psychosis. So there's so many different phases in this illness particularly. I'm curious if you have advice for people with mood disorders.
Yeah, I think the basic model, at first I thought it was about trauma, and it started out to be about trauma. But as I left hospital work and went into private practice a few years later, I realized that it's just a really basically good structure for all kinds of clinical cases. And that would include depression and anxiety and the cycles of bipolar illness. In our show preview, you talked about how you use writing. So when you're feeling manic, when you're feeling depressed, you just get it all down. And I think that's good. I think that's really, just a brain dump is never really a bad thing unless it's kind of going south, in which case you can start to re-regulate. I think the big concerns that I talk to my clients about with depression and mania is that writing in a manic state can be a great way to just get it all out. but it can also become, and tell me if you ever experience this, does it ever get overstimulating for you to be writing really fast in a manic state? Is that something that you encounter at all?
I don't know if I encountered that, but I have to say, I kept folders during some of these terrible times, hospitalizations. And I have these crayon drawings and all different types of writing. And I also have some journals. And I look back and I go, okay, they're very black and white thinking. I must do this. So this happens. I have to say this to that person. And they're unsettling to go back to and look at. So I don't know if in the act it was that difficult, but I couldn't even bring myself to look at them actually before our conversation.
Yeah. So sometimes it can be challenging to write at either end of the continuum. Depression, writing during a serious depressive episode can be problematic if there is no turn toward hope at any point in the write. So, what I've always invited my clients with depression to do is to see if there's any little ray of light that can come in here. And we have a technique in Journal to the Self called Captured Moments, which is about taking any moment of intensity, of sensory intensity, whether it's positive or negative, and containing it in a very short write that focuses on sensory input. The paradoxical thing about captured moments seems to be that if you're writing about something really difficult, but you're doing it in a sensory based way that doesn't take more than 5 to 7 minutes, that can kind of hold and contain the experience. And if you're writing about a positive experience, a moment of beauty or a moment of grace or a moment of joy, and writing from that, from the senses, it seems to expand. It seems to offer possibilities and hope, or at least relief, because we're writing about things that are beautiful or joyous, and that, when done regularly, it contributes to an imprinting on the brain of how positive experiences are also valuable. And we can re engage with them just as easily as we can re engage with our stress or our fear or our dark moods or whatever it happens to be. So I really encourage anybody who is struggling with depression and writing to, by all means, pour it out, and also be mindful of listening for, in your words, a place where you could reframe something into a more hopeful, positive, possible, possibility thinking is really kind of what we're going for. Or whatever strengths support you in a time of a depressed mood. People say writing it down makes it real. And a lot of people avoid writing because writing it down, they think, makes it real. It doesn't make it real, it makes it known. You can write down all kinds of irrational thoughts and they aren't real, but it brings to your awareness that you're having some potentially difficult distortions in your thinking.
I've heard this term rage on the page, and I think I have done that before.
Yeah, yeah,
Everything's wrong with the world, and this is why. And
yeah.
actually, I think it was in your class, maybe one of the first exercises, we were supposed to think about a positive relationship or something positive in our life. And I literally, I'm like, there is nothing positive right now. Like, I can't do this exercise. I guess they sort of come from that position with journaling, that's a little bit more like rage. But by the end of your course, I really understood bringing in that light and how important it is, especially with this whole idea of neuroplasticity and how
Yes.
we're going to form new neural pathways through writing.
Yeah, that's work that my colleague Deborah Ross has pioneered. Deborah was a student in my curriculum design class. She had been studying with Dan Siegel, who's one of the pioneers in neuroscience, specifically in positive brain change, neuroplasticity. And she did her curriculum design class on writing as a form of self-directed neuroplasticity. That was her theory. And she named her course Your Brain on Ink, which I thought was a brilliant title. So she has done just groundbreaking work in this and is a researcher at heart. And so she is up on all of the studies. And we wrote a book called Your Brain on Ink. And I always joke that she's the brains and I was the ink. And she has some really beautiful theories and ideas about how writing in specific ways can really help you change your brain chemistry and your neuron firing and wiring to support neural pathways being developed over time. You can actually change the way that you think. And raging on the page, which is a term that I first heard from Deborah. I don't know if she coined it, but I first heard it from her. If you are just so mad you're going to pop, and you just hate everybody and everything in your life right now, and we all have those moments, it's fine to just dump it all out. And the secret is remembering that if you're feeling worse instead of better and it's not resolving on its own in a reasonable amount of time, then maybe you need to shift it up a little bit and contain. Containment is about how long you spend writing, how long you're going to go before you start pulling yourself back. And 10 or 12 minutes is usually plenty of time to get enough rage externalized that you can start to kind of take a deep breath. So I'm a big fan of setting the timer on your phone and for some interval of time, 10 minutes, 12 minutes, 15 minutes at the most, probably. So you can contain by time, you can contain by space. I'm going to write for one page and stop, and it's all going to go there. Normally, I'm a big fan of saving what you write and having it accessible for reading later on if you decide you want to, because you can see patterns and trends and ways of thinking that are habituated or that are shifting when you go back and read a journal with a little bit of distance from it. But sometimes when you're raging on the page, the most effective thing to do is tear it out of your journal or print it out if you're writing digitally and tear it up or wad it up and stomp on it or do some intentional release and have that symbolize that you are releasing anger and hurt in a healthy, self-affirming way because you're externalizing it instead of internalizing it, and you're done with it now. You don't have to keep it around. So giving yourself permission, there's two other things besides structure, pacing, and containment. I later added balance and permission. Structure, pacing, and containment, you can control those. You can say, I'm going to write for 5 minutes or I'm going to write for 10 minutes. Pacing, I'm going to go deep and then I'm going to come up for air. And I'm going to walk around, get a drink of water, stretch, check outside, see if the sun's shining, and come back to the writing. Structure is how you give yourself tools that will keep you from falling off the edge, like the structure of a specific technique. A captured moment describes a moment of intense emotional or sensory experience, whether that's positive or negative. I like positive because it brings balance to the journal. Now you can bring in some more balance by reflecting on that process and saying, whew, that felt good. How do I feel about what I was writing about? It still hurts. It still makes me mad, but I feel like I've had a release. And so I'm going to take that for the moment and go on. The reflection write is something that you can do after any write, and it's a read back in the moment or later, the next day or later on after dinner or whatever, a read back of what you wrote, and then just dropping down a couple of lines in your journal and letting yourself reflect on it through a question or through a sentence stem that might start, as I read this, I notice, or I'm aware of, or I'm worried about, or I'm amazed by, or I'm curious, anything like that, that just allows you to bring insight and awareness to what just happened. And I am convinced that the reflection right is one of the most fruitful processes we can use in writing because it helps us understand just what just happened and put it in a context of, as I read this, I'm aware that I've been writing about the same thing a lot lately. Is there something I might do to, mix it up a little bit, to shift it, to break it down? What do I need to do to take a step toward not doing this the same way that I've always been doing it? And I'd be curious to know what your experience of reflection rights is in the context of writing through either end of bipolar illness.
So I am a big fan of shredding.
Good.
I have a
Shredding
shredder
is a good thing.
right next to my desk, and that feels amazing. I think that the reflection is still a little bit new to me. I think in the book Brain on Ink, I believe the point where you're reflecting and perhaps making changes in your life because of it, that's really when the neuroplasticity is setting in.
Yeah. And it's practice, practice, practice. It's repetition. Your brain doesn't change, in a minute. Deborah compares this to what if you had to reinstall your operating system on your computer every 3 days? It would be chaos. There's the reason why operating systems are somewhat fixed because they're intended to be stability over time. And the reflection right and journal writing in general is kind of the same thing, that you don't change your brain overnight or in, 2 weeks or anything else, but you can enhance the possibilities of positive brain change through regular use of strategies. That does not mean you don't ever cathart or gripe or complain or be mad. But what it does mean is that you treat yourself and your writing with the courage and the respect to recognize that this is a powerful tool for growth. And some of the things that enhance the possibility of positive brain change are things like looking for the positive in this, finding the affirmative, recognizing that however messy it feels right now, you do have the strength, and you have demonstrated that throughout your life, to manage difficult situations. And the insight and synthesis that comes from not only intentionally bringing in positivity, not in a phony way, not in a spray painting it pink and calling it nice, but in an authentic wrestling with yourself to say, my deepest fear is that this is never going to get better. And my deepest hope is that I can rise above this. Even if I can't do it right now, there's tons of little tricks you can use, like a strengths assessment. Where am I feeling strong right now? Where am I feeling vulnerable right now? How can my strength help me manage my vulnerability? It can feel like it's not really going anywhere, but when you are turning toward hope, when you are taking a turn toward hope, or you are imagining, even if you have to make it up, you can add in strengthening measures so that you are able to find new pathways through old problems or situations.
And it can be so easy and accessible. That's what I love about this.
Yeah.
And I mentioned I recently taught a class where we did clustering,
Oh,
which
yeah.
is basically when we're kids doing bubble brainstorms. You start with a date or a topic and add to it one bubble after the next. I have
Mhm.
very advanced writers that took this class with me, and it was the biggest, freshest new idea they had seen ever. And it's
Oh,
so simple, but it gave them a place to start without pressure, without the feeling of a destination, and just this playful ease into their writing. So I think it goes to show that this is accessible work really for anyone.
yes. And clustering, bubble brain, as you call it, I love that. Because it does look like bubbles on the page. It's like a central hub and then spokes going out for associative thoughts, and then thoughts springing other thoughts, so it just goes out like a spider web, kind of. It's not as clean as a spider web. It's kind of messy, but that is a perfect example of containment. And for some of my clients who have been prone to manic episodes, clustering is their very favorite technique because it captures things, it contains them, and it helps soothe the flight of ideas, the whole kind of crash and burn of I have 16 thoughts going on all at the same time and I don't know which one to think about, or to let in. And just that overwhelm, when you can just do a cluster and have it fill the entire page with all of these different things, it holds them in place and it's a container on the page. So that's a very good technique for people who are feeling overstimulated. And it brings just a whole bunch of insight, particularly when you step back from the cluster. When I was working in the first psych hospital, I did a relaxation group every night for the patients before bed. And one of their favorite things to do in relaxation group was to cluster the day. So the day's date was in the center, and then there were things spreading out all over the place, like doctor's visit. I had a psychiatric session, and my brother came in and he brought the dog, and he was a jerk because he owes me money and he won't pay it back. And, those kinds of things. And then they would write a little synthesis, and I would invite them to either close the books, or if they were writing on blank paper, to just fold it up and put it in their, pocket or sit down on it or something. And we just do a little guided imagery about this day is over. You have it captured. You have it documented. You can let go of it. It's going to be here in your journal tomorrow if you want it back. And tonight you can just let this day go to sleep, get a good night's sleep, start over tomorrow. The night nurses reported, and the patients confirmed, that they fell asleep faster, stayed asleep longer with no additional medication, and they were not up in the middle of the night roaming the halls as much. So that simple technique of putting the day to bed before they went to bed was a real game changer for them. They were more able to use the work when they weren't exhausted.
It's so beneficial. And then,
That's right.
Kay, would you just have a few words of advice for anyone getting going?
I would encourage you to think of this in terms of how you make new friendships or how you make new relationships, because the relationship with the journal is an actual ongoing relationship with yourself. So, if you're tentative, if you're a little bit skeptical, if you don't feel like this is probably going to work for you, start small. Just write for 5 minutes about anything that's going on. It doesn't have to be important. It can just be, how's my day going so far? Or what's something I'm looking forward to? Or what's staying with me from yesterday that I'm still thinking about? And having a variety of ways to write is really helpful because it's not a one-size-fits-all thing. Free writing is the most popular technique for people who don't have a different idea of where to start. That's perfectly fine. But just be mindful that, free writing doesn't have structure, pacing, or containment. So if you start feeling a little tippy or a little uneasy with it, then just back it off, stop, stand up, stretch. That's pacing. Then pick up again or leave it. Come back later, do a reflection. And the reflection, I think, is a bridge that can really enhance the journey from never writing to sort of writing. The reflection right can be one of the things that can help you realize in fairly short order that there may be more to it than just what is on the page. There's the feelings and the emotions and the ideas behind it that can all be captured in the reflection. And the reflection will also give you oftentimes a head start. As I read this, I'm aware that I want to explore this further. Well, there's a breadcrumb for you on the path. So pick another dimension of it and try it again the next day or whatever. I also think, give yourself some grace. Balance and permission are the other two things besides structure, pacing, containment. We talked a little bit about balance, that it helps to just bring a spot of light in or a ray of hope if you are writing about things that are problematic or troubling for you. Permission is just what it sounds like. There's no rules other than the rules that you choose to put into place. And you don't have to write every day. You don't have to make sense. You don't have to write about positive things only. You don't have to do anything. This is a way of learning about your own preferences. And many times we don't really know what we prefer. We just do things because they're expected of us. And we don't always stop to think about, is this really what I want to be doing? The journal is so flexible and so loving is the word that comes to me, and so forgiving. You are in charge. You are driving this vehicle, and you can pull over on the side of the road anytime you want to. So I would say just give yourself permission to experiment, give yourself permission to try new things. And I think classes, like the Journal to the Self workshop that you'll be teaching. I have written a lot of books, two of which are 366-day prompt books. The Journal Therapy for Calming Anxiety is one of them. Journal Therapy for Overcoming Burnout is the other.
And your Brain on Ink, too, super motivating.
Yes.
This work is just for anyone. It's enjoyable, challenging, but it's great for very successful writers that just want to reboot.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I just love the way that writing has really taken off in the field of mental health and emotional wellness, because it's so useful. It's so helpful. And there are entire books written. Beth Jacobs, one of my colleagues in the poetry therapy world, wrote a book. She's a psychologist in Chicago. She wrote a book called Writing for Emotional Balance. And it's all about mood regulation through writing. It's a really nice book. So there's tons and tons of resources that can be so helpful for people with mood disorders or any kind of struggle with mental health. I think there's something for everybody.
Absolutely. And I will post links to your books. There's so many and share what you're doing. And I love how you say, we can't do this work fast enough.
Yes, yes. Those of us who are in the field of offering writing to others, the world is on fire right now, not just in America, but also in other parts of the world. We just are having a really tough time. And a lot of people are struggling, whether that's inflation or the cost of eggs or whatever it is. We're all kind of stressing right now. And writing is a reliable guide to helping us stay rational and calm and regulated in very troubling times.
Well, thank you so much. It's so nice to talk to you. I feel so fortunate to have gotten to know you, and I'm excited to do this journaling work. So thank you.
Oh, I'm so thrilled. And thank you very much that you are such a gracious podcast host. And I appreciated the opportunity to talk with your audience.
Please consider Bipolar She a work of advocacy, getting important stories to those who need them. Please like us and rate us and leave us a review wherever you find your podcasts, and especially on Apple Podcasts. Find us online at bipolarshe.com or at bipolarshepod on Instagram. And thank you, as always, for your support.